To me, the most outrageous thing that PBMs do to consumers, to patients, they are overruling doctors and pharmacists as to what medication patients take. You go to the pharmacy to get it, pharmacist tries to get you drug X, and they get a message back that says, we don't cover drug X. Mrs. Smith, if you want any coverage from your prescription drug insurance, you've got to take drug Y. I want my doctor, I want my primary care provider, I want my pharmacist deciding the best drugs for me, not some anonymous bean counter in St. Louis.
Welcome to the Trusted Pharmacist, where you'll learn the truth about how the body works. Welcome back to the Trusted Pharmacist podcast, where we pull back the curtain on how the body works and how the healthcare system sometimes doesn't. I'm your host, Steve Hoffart, pharmacist and advocate for real practical healthcare solutions. Today's episode's one I've been waiting to do for a long time. We're taking a deep dive into one of the biggest threats to both your pharmacy and your pocketbook. That's pharmacy benefit managers. Those are called PBMs. These middlemen are quietly steering the cost of your prescription higher while putting an independent pharmacy like myself on life support. Joining me today is Doug Hoey, CEO of the National Community of Pharmacists Association. NCPA represents the owners of nearly 19,000 pharmacy small businesses whose pharmacists provide prescription dispensing services and help fill primary care gaps. Consumers consistently rate community pharmacies as the top-rated pharmacies in the country, and Doug is a licensed pharmacist in both Oklahoma, Virginia, and Texas as he practiced in a community pharmacy, including his own family's pharmacy before coming to NCPA. He's widely quoted by media and its industry experts on community pharmacy payment and practice issues. His pharmacy degree is from the University of Oklahoma, and his MBA is from Oklahoma City University. Doug's been on the front lines of this fight for years, exposing the hidden games of PBMs and how they play it, from price manipulation to steering patients away from their trusted pharmacies. And if you've ever wanted to know why drugs cost so much, why your local pharmacy is closing its doors, this episode will open your eyes to what's going on. So Doug, welcome, buddy.
Hey, Steve, great to be here. Known Steve, we've known each other for a long time, and being a podcaster is just one of your many talents, as I didn't know until very recently. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Awesome. Great to have you join us. So let's just start out. People may not know National Community Pharmacists Association. Doug is the CEO. What do you do there every day, man?
Yeah, I get that question a lot from my own staff. What do you do? But no, seriously, we represent the nearly 19,000 community pharmacists around the country. That's about 40% of all of the pharmacies in the country are independently owned pharmacies. Some people call it mom and pop pharmacies. And what we do advocacy. So we're in Alexandria, Virginia, which is just across the river from some people call it the swamp, some people call it our nation's capital. We have lobbyists on staff. I'm not a lobbyist, but we definitely do advocacy. We do education for these small business owners, not only from a clinical standpoint, so they can stay sharp to make sure patients are getting the right medications at the right time and using them most effectively and safely, but also from a business standpoint, because not only are independent pharmacists clinicians, healthcare providers, but they're also small business owners. And so they have to keep track of, a lot of the different rules and regulations that come up, as well as managing people and managing finances that small business owners all have to contend with to be successful. So we have a team of about 50 people here, and, we're true believers in small business and independent pharmacists here.
Well, we appreciate you being a voice for us. And like you said, because you're not out there somewhere getting the word out about what community pharmacists do, it becomes a challenge. So pharmacy has changed so much in the last 5 to 10 years, and really it has nothing to do with pharmacies and pharmacists. It has to do with the healthcare system we're in. And there's something called PBMs, which maybe 10 years ago nobody heard about. Now you can put PBM in any Google search and it's going to pop up some probably not so nice things. So just to break down, PBMs are something I interact every day when I deal with prescriptions with patients that come to my pharmacy. But in your eyes, what exactly is a PBM, and why do they control so much of this drug dispensing system?
Yeah, PBM. So that is, as you mentioned, up until recently, this hidden, behind the scenes, really dominant manipulator of prescription drug prices and prescription drug access. And so maybe just a tiny bit of history on PBMs. They've been around for a long time. They've been around, technically for close to 50 years, but really prominently, I'd say, for maybe the last 30 to 35 years. It's only been, and they, they've been sort of a pain in the side of independent pharmacy owners and pharmacies for most of that 30 years. But it's been, as you mentioned, the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years that they have risen from not only a pain in the side, they've changed where that pain is for independent pharmacy owners to be much greater than that, but they've also have become much more prominent with patients deciding which drugs patients can and cannot take, which pharmacies patients can and cannot go to, and how much they will pay, how much patients will pay for those drugs. That's become more prominent in the last, like I said, about 10 years or so. They've also, and no one has a lot of sympathy for the big drug manufacturers. However, PBMs and the drug manufacturers used to kind of have a thing together. They were sort of an it couple for a while. Well, that relationship has gone sour. And now PBMs really dictate to pharmaceutical manufacturers. The PBMs have gotten bigger and more powerful than the pharmaceutical manufacturers. So that's kind of the brief history. Early on, they did perform a reasonable function that made it easier for patients to get reimbursed for their prescription drugs. And they also helped speed up the transaction. So they actually did have a useful purpose at the start. But they've morphed into something that has become this dominant player, just three of them, three, and we'll name names here. Aetna, Caremark, that's one of them. Also CVS, Aetna, Caremark, all the same company, all one company. So if you hear Aetna, you hear CVS, you hear Caremark, you're talking about the same company. Cigna, Express Scripts, that's the second one. And then the granddaddy of them all, United Health and Optum. Those three, so their PBMs are Optum, Express Scripts, and CVS Caremark, control 80% of all of the prescriptions that go in and out of pharmacies, in and out of patients' mouths that they take every day. 80% are controlled by those three. And I still haven't really explained what they do, which is they're the middleman. They're in between the patient and the pharmacy. They're in between the pharmacy and the manufacturer. And they're in between the employer who provides the prescription drug benefit and the employee. So because they're in the middle of all those important transactions, they tell the employer how much it's going to cost. They tell the patient how much they're going to pay, and they tell the pharmacy how much they're going to get paid. They also tell the manufacturer. They demand from the manufacturer money in order to have their drug covered. So they're a middleman. They move stuff around. They move stuff around, and they get paid handsomely for it. About 70% of all the costs of prescription drugs go to these middlemen. 70, not 17, 70% for moving the chairs on the deck of the Titanic around. They get 70% of the total costs. So if a drug costs $1,000, almost $700 of that $1,000 is being extracted from these middlemen for shuffling things around.
That's just crazy when you think about it. And that, sadly, we've been dealing with PBM so long. And I think about this. My mentor owned a pharmacy in Magnolia, Texas, where I'm at. And in 2000, he come to me and says, "I'm selling my pharmacy." I'm like, "Why are you selling your pharmacy?" He goes, and this is the old days. He goes, "There's this new thing to come to town, and we have to take this card and we have to paper bill these claims, and then they're going to pay me when they want to pay me." And I'm like, "What is this?" He goes, "I'm just going to tell you, I don't know, but this is going to run pharmacy." He goes, "I just have a bad feeling about that." And sure as world, he sold out. We can see where we're at, where it's gone off the rails. Because you're right, initially it was complicated. Pharmacies set prices, and we were all competitive. You were competitive with the neighbor down the street, and you set a drug price, and that's how prices happen. Well, these PBMs set in to quote unquote help make that easier, but we kind of know where that all kind of went off the rails as far as that goes.
Well, there's an old saying that pigs get fed and hogs get slaughtered. And they're definitely in the hog category at this point.
No, I would agree with that. So why do you think it is, though, PBMs crept in all those years and got to the point where they have so much power, where patients don't know anything about it? And as far, but even a lot of like doctors and practitioners, they don't even have a concept of PBMs. How do you think they got so far down the road and so embedded in this healthcare system where like your healthcare practitioner don't even know about them?
Well, I think one of the very smart things that they did. These are not dumb people. These are really smart, cunning people. One of the smart things they did, and this is back when the relationship with the pharmaceutical manufacturers was they were really liking each other back then. They hid the true cost of the drug. So let's just say, go back 20 years where an expensive brand drug might be, $100. They would say, okay, this drug is $100, but we're going to hide the cost, so the patient only pays, say, $10. And now someone else is paying that $90, and it's going to be the manufacturer, or it's going to be the employer that's going to pay that $90. But for the consumer, for the patient, they're saying, hey, this is great. I'm getting a brand name drug. It's only $10. I'm getting a lot of value from my prescription insurance because look, they're paying $90 of this $100. So that's how it started. And it crept up and up and up until rather than $100, now, a GLP-1, which, very common, popular drug, they're $1,000 to $1,200 now. So brand drugs are much more expensive. So they were very invasive, almost like kudzu or dandelions, that just kind of take over your yard one by one. From a doctor, doctor's trying to diagnose the patient, get the patient the drug that they think is going to help that patient the most. Honestly, they don't want to have to hassle with all of this back end administrative bureaucracy just to get the patient the drug that they want, and it'll get figured out at the pharmacy. So I think that, and the other thing I'd say is that the PBMs definitely, they wanted to be behind the scenes. The angriest call I've ever gotten from a PBM executive was, I was quoted in the New York Times, this is at least a decade ago, and I called out a PBM by name. And that was the angriest call I've ever gotten because I called them out by name. They did not want their name in the New York Times or any other publication because they wanted to be behind the scenes. And so it was very tactical on their part to make the system very complex, so it's hard to trace them. And it was also very tactical on their part to be behind the scenes. They would still be behind the scenes if they hadn't been called out so much for all their bad deeds.
No, you're right on with that. I do think I like that. I like how you brought that up. I think it's an important part. When people went from paying for the full price of their drug, had to submit it to get reimbursed, all of a sudden you're paying this quote unquote copay. And that copay is quite manipulative because you're right. That's what the patient sees is what they're spending up front. But on the back end, there are so many things going on. You're right. Your employer's paying for part of your coverage. But now we'll get into some of this too. On the back end, you've got Big Pharma, like you said, which kind of gets vilified sometimes, but they're also getting manipulated by the PBM and covering some things. And we'll talk about some of those. But I think that's a great analogy is how they snuck in as being a good guy to make the system better. They took advantage. And next thing you know, we're sitting where we're at today, where it's like they're just a threat to all of us. So they play a lot of shell games. You're right. And as a pharmacist, I see this. It's like what the tactic was this week. We figure out how to survive. They change it a month from now. And then the next contract that comes out, they change it again. So we're going to go into some of the bigger things that they do. One of the first ones I'm going to talk about I was on NBC Nightly News about 6 years ago, something called a gag clause. What is a gag? How does a PBM use a gag clause?
Well, the gag clauses, they're beyond the pale. So a gag clause, the pharmacists know, especially an independent pharmacist. Independent pharmacists have access to the cost of the drug. They know how much they pay for the drug. They know how much they're getting reimbursed. They know how much the patient pays. Sometimes the chain, and this is not a knock, I'm not trying to knock the chain drug stores, but a lot of times that information, all of that information, maybe they get the chain pharmacists may have pieces of that information, but a lot of times the corporations, don't necessarily want their chain pharmacists to have all of the pieces of information, but an independent pharmacist does. And so when our members would see a patient just basically getting raked over the coals, like, for example, when they use their insurance, when they use their prescription insurance, they were actually paying more than if they just paid cash. Sometimes tens to 20 to hundreds of dollars more by using their insurance versus paying cash. If the pharmacist went out to tell the patient, hey, Mrs. Smith, if you use your insurance, if you paid cash, it would be $25. Your insurance wants to charge you $95. The pharmacist, if the PBM found out about that, the pharmacy would get a nasty letter from their lawyers, from the PBM's lawyers, saying, you can't talk. You can't talk to the patient. You can't do anything except dispense this drug that we tell you to dispense. If you do this again, we may kick you out of the network, which kicking the pharmacy out of the network is basically getting excommunicated. You're getting kicked off the island. You can no longer fill prescriptions, not just for that patient, but for any patient who has that insurance. And so, because, as I mentioned, three different these PBMs own 80% of the market. So if you get kicked out of one of them, by average, you just lost 25, 27% of all of your business. So it's a powerful threat. And the PBMs are very quick to try to retaliate and take action against. I mean, it's unbelievable how petty they are, and unbelievable that a pharmacist trying to help this patient save money gets not only their hand slapped, but they get kind of a knee kick to the gut for trying to help this patient.
I'm happy to say, because of you guys' work and effort and that news story and whatever else, gag clauses are pretty much off the books nowadays, and definitely a lot of states. But on a federal level, because of some of that, because enough pharmacists, like, enough's enough. Like, if we can't do what's best for our patients, we're not going to do pharmacy. That's why we all got in this. So that's kind of funny you say that.
I was proud to be at the bill signing. I was actually at the bill signing when that happened with some of my independent pharmacy colleagues. So, and thank you, Steve, for speaking out, because you going on the nightly news and speaking out, I mean, you were putting yourself out there, and these guys don't mess around. I mean, it's unbelievable. Again, you're out there trying to help people, and these are like the biggest bullies in the industry. And so thank you for putting yourself out there, because you were putting yourself at risk.
It's funny you say that, because the reporter, when she was leaving, she's like, is there anything like you don't want us to put out there? I was like, no, put it out there. And I say, because I'll tell you this much. If they come to me and try to take me off a contract, you're going to have your next big story, because that's exactly what I told her. I said, as long as you're going to cover me later, I got you now. So that was good. Spread pricing. This is a big one. I think many states have shown they use PBMs for their coverage of their Medicaid recipients. And when these PBMs do it, one of the things they've run audits on is something called spread pricing, and found millions and millions of dollars worth of money that these PBMs are taking from a state. What exactly is a spread pricing?
Yeah, so spread pricing. So if you're a taxpayer, pay attention to this one, which is probably everyone. So spread pricing is when the PBM, so remember, the PBM's in the middle of everything. So in this case, it's in the middle between the employer, which could be your state government or the federal government, and the pharmacy. This is that middle, because remember, it's got a bunch of middle relationships. In this middle relationship, the PBM charges the employer a higher price than what they pay the pharmacy. So just to give an example, let's just say it's a generic antibiotic, amoxicillin, fairly inexpensive drug. And let's just say that patient comes to the pharmacy, they need a prescription for amoxicillin, and the patient pays $15, let's just say, for their amoxicillin. And the pharmacy, let's just say, gets some of that $15. The PBM then turns around and charges the employer a higher price. So the employer might get charged $35 for that prescription that the patient paid and the pharmacy received $15 for. So that's the spread. In this case, $35 that the employer paid minus $15 for the amoxicillin. That's a difference of $20. That's the spread that the PBM charges the employer. So some people may say, well, that's the employer, they're paying the extra. Well, if the employer's paying that, that's getting passed down to the employees. And if it's a state, like, for example, the state of Ohio is one example, they found that they were paying an extra $220 million in 1 year in spread pricing. So that's taxpayer money. Just think how many firefighters, police officers, school buildings, county roads, bridges could have been built or repaired or hired with $220 million in one state. So just extrapolate that across the entire country, and it gets into the billions of dollars. It's not just been Ohio. Other states got wise to it, and they have found, I think Kentucky was like $50 to $70 million. West Virginia was $50 million. And on and on and on it goes, of states just getting ripped off. And if your state's getting ripped off, that means you as a taxpayer are getting ripped off.
No, that's great. One of the other things is I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me yesterday at the pharmacy, as a matter of fact. Talk about clawbacks. I won't really even get into what's called a DIR, which is direct and indirect remuneration. That was a Medicare Part D thing, which thank goodness has kind of gone away in other ways. But clawbacks, tell me, can you imagine a business, and I'll let you give your analogy of what happens. Can you imagine a business where you run your business and you think you made X amount on a product, and then you find out 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 12, say 12 weeks later that you actually got, quote unquote, overpaid, and they're going to take money back? Do PBMs actually do stuff like that?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. They do clawbacks. You're right. There are some limitations that have been imposed on clawbacks in Medicare. So for beneficiaries over the age of 65 in Medicare, there are some guardrails against that pretty recently, just in the last year and a half. Up until then, the Medicare beneficiaries were being overcharged a higher price. They'd pay a percentage of that higher price, and then the PBMs would take back some of that money that they charged from the pharmacy. So the pharmacy would have to collect this overpayment, and then the PBM would steal it, take it from the pharmacy. Federal government finally, after years and years, a decade of lobbying saying this is wrong, this is bad for consumers, bad for pharmacies, bad for everyone except PBMs, they finally got it right, or got it better, like you said. It's still happening in the commercial market. So if you're one of the probably 50% of the population that has commercial insurance, which means you're not covered by Medicare, you're not covered by Medicaid, and you don't have, state employee or federal employee insurance, you're commercial. So it's about half the country. PBMs are doing clawbacks with pharmacies. So again, they'll say, hey, pharmacy, I'm going to use that amoxicillin example. Hey, we paid you $15. The patient paid $15. And then 3 months later, the PBM says to the pharmacy, oh, just kidding. I know we said we would pay you $15, but we're actually only going to pay you $6.94. Well, where'd you come up with that? But first of all, don't talk to us. You have no way to talk to us. Secondly, it's none of your business how we take money from you. We're going to just do it, and you have basically no recourse. And so that, whatever that is, $8 or so that's taken away, just poof, gone from the pharmacy. And then, so that's $8. Multiply that by the average pharmacy, average independent pharmacy does about 60,000 prescriptions a year. Multiply that by 60,000 prescriptions, and you've got the difference between a business being able to stay in business and a business having to close its doors.
I'll tell you about a clawback thing that happened to me yesterday. So we can get it. I don't really want to get into cash discount cards because that's another animal. We don't even sign up for a cash discount card, but automatically we're on these networks and they bring an XYZ card and you run things through and it's supposed to get the better negotiated price. I ran one through yesterday for one of the big three. Lady got 6 maintenance scripts, something for blood pressure, diabetes, 6 things like that. What was crazy is when we ran them through to get her negotiated discounted price, the PBM sucked off a certain amount of medicine. One prescription alone, it had me charge the lady $77 discounted price. But on the back end, they took out a $58.33
Oh my gosh.
fee for that. That was just one of the scripts. Out of the 6, they took back $125 off of this lady's prescriptions that I was collecting that they're sucking on the back end for me. Even better. Ready for this? I call the lady up and I'm like, tell me about your insurance. She's like, oh yeah, it is a discount card, but you know what? I get a rebate. They send me every month when you run those through, I get a check for like $25. I'm like, well, let me tell you, they're taking about $125 from me, but they're only giving you back $25. I was like, I think there's a problem with that. So that was a kind of a clawback, if you want to call it. And just for the record, if anybody doesn't know, when you use discount cards, not only do they shaft pharmacies and charge us a fee to find out your discount, they also are selling information and making money off all that. So just keep that in mind when you use. Go into pharmacy and ask for like the best cash price. That's your best.
Buyer beware with discount cards.
Yeah, that's just the thing. So just one more quick thing you mentioned earlier about restrictions and who do you want to be the doctor or the PBM? Let's talk about a formulary. Hospitals have been used to formularies forever because they can't carry every drug. Pharmacies, knock on wood, we have the ability to carry what we want to carry because your doctor wants to do what's best for you. But how are PBMs using formularies and prior authorizations to really take that power away from your local prescriber?
This may be the most of everything we talk about. If I'm a listener, this might be the most outrageous and frankly, the thing that may anger you the most of everything we say. So a formulary is basically when we say, hey, my insurance will cover this drug. That's a formulary. But, if you get a list from your employer and says, here's a list of drugs that your insurance plan covers, that's the same as saying your formulary. So if you're on the if your drug is on the formulary, it's covered. So the insidious thing and nefarious thing that PBMs have done with formularies is they've really weaponized them. So this is a huge cash cow for PBM. So what they do is they basically take the drugs that are on the formulary and they bid them out for auction. They go to the manufacturer. So I'm just going to use I'll use Merck. Merck. You can plug in Pfizer, Lilly, Novartis, Bristol Myers, whomever you want to pick. A manufacturer. They go to a manufacturer and say, you've got a pretty good drug there. It's pretty effective. People like it, saves lives, but we're not going to cover it unless you pay us a boatload of money. And if you're, again, Pfizer, Bristol Myers, Lilly, whomever, you say, well, wait a second, this is a good drug. People should have it. And the insurance company PBM says, I don't really care. If you're not paying me money, I'm not going to cover it. I'm going to make it hard for that patient to get and hard for the doctor to prescribe it. So the drug company says, well, how much do you want? And it averages about 70%. So what the manufacturer, again, the Lilly, Pfizer, Bristol Myers, Merck, et cetera, have to pay averages about 70% of what the list price is for the drug. They have to pay to the PBM to get space on the formulary, to get their drug covered. If they don't pay up, this is like mafia. This is like mafia stuff, like, hey, you want some protection money? It's a nice little cafe you have here, Biff. If you don't pay us the protection money, then we're gonna get a little fire could happen or something. So it's basically extortion money that the manufacturers have to pay. If they don't pay it, the drug doesn't get covered. So to me, the most outrageous thing that PBMs do to consumers, to patients, is that these bean counters, these accountant MBA somewhere, which that's great. They're accountant MBAs, but they should use their powers for good, not evil. They are overruling doctors and pharmacists as to what medication patients take. They're overruling them. So your doctor writes for drug X. You go to the pharmacy to get it. Pharmacist tries to get you drug X, and they get a message back that says, we don't cover drug X. Mrs. Smith, if you want any coverage from your prescription drug insurance, you've got to take drug Y, because the manufacturer for drug Y agreed to pay the PBM more kickback money than what the manufacturer of drug X did. To me, that is like beyond the pale. Like, I want my doctor, I want my primary care provider, I want my pharmacist deciding the best drugs for me, not some anonymous bean counter in St. Louis deciding what I should be taking and what I shouldn't be taking.
No, that's we deal with that all the time. And, you almost have to have a staff member a day. I can tell you, my doctor friends hate these prior auths that are required to get these drugs covered, because what happens is they have to pay a staff member the whole day to just go through these processes. There's no rhyme or reason. They have to fill out a bunch of forms, and my doctor buddies hate it. So they just soon change what they want to do to something that they have to do. And same way on the pharmacy staff. We have people that our technicians are working on these all day long, and you spend days getting something to try to get something approved, and then they can say no. So it's frustrating. When we started this conversation, you mentioned the big three, and there was this one like Aetna, CVS, Caremark you mentioned thing. It's this vertical integration of healthcare, which has really screwed the system all up. And they do something called steering, because there's some money to be made there. Maybe they own their own pharmacy. What is steering? Like, what is that all about?
So we go back to PBMs being the judge, the jury, and the executioner when it comes to how much patients pay, what drugs are covered, and which pharmacy they can go to. And so this is the part about which pharmacy they can go to. You mentioned vertical integration, and you also mentioned the worst offender is CVS, Caremark, Aetna. Again, those are all one company. They're not three separate companies. They're all the same company. And because Aetna's the medical provider, Caremark's the prescription provides the prescription coverage, and CVS is the brick and mortar pharmacy, they can control where that patient goes. So you go to your doctor using your Aetna insurance, and they say, well, here's a prescription. I'm a doctor. I'm going to bill this claim through Aetna, and your prescription insurance coverage wants you to use CVS. You have a quote unquote choice to use other pharmacies, but if you use another pharmacy, you're going to have to pay more. So it's really not really, it's a choice without a choice. So you're steered into, in this case, CVS. That's a real obvious example, but where it's a little bit more or less obvious is that CVS, Caremark, as well as Cigna Express Scripts, again, same company, Cigna Express Scripts, United Health Optum, again, same company, they all own mail order pharmacies and specialty drugs, something called specialty drugs. These are drugs used to be, and they still are, they're usually high dollar drugs. So a lot of these drugs you see advertised on either the nightly news or some of the, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, daytime television. Those are specialty drugs, and there's others as well. Very powerful, often very effective, often life-saving, life-changing drugs. Super, really great products from these pharmaceutical manufacturers that really help people a lot. They are expensive, and these mail order pharmacies want to control that. So this vertical integration, the steering, not only steers patients into brick and mortar pharmacies, they also steer them, especially their specialty prescriptions, the high dollar prescriptions, into mail order. So these big three PBM vertically integrated companies, they control 70% of all of the specialty medications that go through their mail order warehouses. So this lack of patient choice, and lack of competition has gotten the attention of the FTC as well, the Federal Trade Commission. under both administrations, both Democratic and Republican administrations. And we applaud that. And we just would ask them to hurry up and do more because we think this is anti-competitive and anti-consumer.
No, you're right. It's some of the like, and we've talked for like 25 minutes over these tactics, and I haven't even covered rebates. I haven't covered audits. I mean, there's so many shell games they use, and I can tell you there's like 5 more things they thought of that we don't even know about yet that are coming down the road. Like that's just how they play. I mean, I hate to say it.
They have tons of money. I mean, they're super rich. They're super connected because they're vertically integrated. They're almost like too big to fail. So United Health, I mean, they are huge. They're well over, they're what, $200 billion company. If the government goes after them, they can say, look, you need me because I cover, 75 million patients or however many patients they have coverage for. So they've gotten so big that they're almost too big to fail. And when you're too big to fail, that usually is a bad deal for consumers. It's a bad deal for patients. And I think consumers often underestimate how much power and influence they have. And I think, and I'm a patient sometimes too. I'm definitely a consumer in addition to being a pharmacist. I think we as consumers sometimes capitulate to this lousy reality that PBMs are creating. And, I think that is one area of change that's going to be needed to change the system and to get the government to really, normally I don't want the government getting involved in anything, but this too big to fail, we need some kind of, whether it's FTC or some referee to come in and say, wait a second, this thing's gotten out of control. And we need some guardrails to get this, flipped back so that we can have a capitalistic democracy versus this, one-sided take it or leave it situation that we have.
Yeah, let's talk about that too big to fail. I'm a pharmacy owner, been in for 20 plus years. And some of the stuff I've seen the last couple of years in this PBM world, it's just, you can't make it up. But we've all been forced to change and be a little different. Not to be all doom and gloom, but what kind of I can almost guarantee you everybody on this podcast knows a local pharmacy in their community or even a big chain that's closed in the last couple of years, because this isn't about independent community pharmacy. This is retails. These are the big chains. They're going out. I mean, what kind of impact has it had on pharmacies and what kind of problems has it created, especially in rural communities?
Well, almost 15% of all the pharmacies in the country, 15%. So roughly 5,000, 6,000, almost 6,000 pharmacies have closed in the last 7 years. And that's 15,000 fewer choices. It's about I'm sorry, I said 15,000. I meant 15%. 15%, about 6,000 fewer choices that patients have. And one resultant of that is our pharmacy deserts. So there were pharmacy deserts before all this rash of closures, unprecedented rash of closures. I've never seen anything like it in my career over my lifetime. But it's increasing the number of pharmacy deserts. And even if you're not in a pharmacy desert, which some people say, oh, pharmacy desert, that's only rural areas. Well, sometimes it is. It's sometimes very urban areas. But even if you're not in, and it's about a fourth of the country, and that's in a pharmacy desert, according to some research that we work with the University of Southern California on, it's about a fourth of the country. Even if you're not in a pharmacy desert, all these closures are having an impact, could be having an impact on the average patient, because now there's fewer pharmacies still filling the same number of prescriptions. So that's putting more pressure in the pharmacies, more pressure on the staff, more pressure on the pharmacy owners and the chains to do more with less, because the payments from the PBMs keep getting lower and lower. So especially in the chains, we're seeing longer wait times. We're seeing more people go to get their medication. They say, well, it's not going to be ready for a day or 2 or 3 or longer. Don't see that as much with the independents, but there's still a lot of stress and pressure being put on the independents, trying to take care of all these orphaned patients who've whose pharmacies have had to close. So it's creating just a toxic environment that's bad for patients. And if patients haven't been affected by it yet, just wait. I mean, because the odds are you will be impacted at some point by the after effects of what the PBMs are doing to the system.
Let's look at a flip side. I know my business now, because of PBMs, looks a lot different than it did because we've had to make a lot of hard choices because we either make choices to change or I'm not in business to take care of my community anymore. And like that's not even a mindset for mine. Like I would do anything I can to make sure I take care of my community. And so would every other pharmacist that I know. How are pharmacies adapting and what are they adding to actually be more beneficial? I mean, community pharmacies already benefit they're the pillar of their community in terms of healthcare. What are you seeing some of the pharmacies doing to even become more adaptive so they can survive this crazy business structure?
Yeah, it's a great question because pharmacies are, especially independent pharmacies, we're resilient. We adapt even in very difficult environments. So we're seeing pharmacists, especially independent pharmacies, go into parallel lines of business. So, for example, vaccinations. That's one example that pharmacies have gotten a lot more involved in. Pharmacy compounding. I know you do a fantastic job with compounding in your pharmacy, and more pharmacies are considering providing these customized medications for patients based on their doctor's orders. There's a shortage of primary care providers in the United States, and so while pharmacists are pharmacists, we don't want to be doctors. We're pharmacists. We're medication experts. We're not diagnosticians. That said, there are some primary care services that pharmacists can fill that provide better accessibility, better convenience, and the same or better outcomes than the traditional ways. And pharmacists would do that in cooperation and collaboration with the patient's doctor, primary care provider. So they're saying, like point of care testing. There are things like, smoking cessation, helping with smoking cessation, some diabetes counseling. Again, not instead of your doctor, but in support with your doctor so that it's easier for the patient. Patient gets a better outcome. Patient lives a healthier life, and it saves money too.
No, and that's what I'm most excited about as a pharmacist. And the payers are starting to see the value of a pharmacist because the more times a pharmacist meets with the patient, the better outcomes we're seeing. And payers are starting to see that and recognize that. And as a pharmacist, that's what I'm super excited about. So for our listeners or for our patients that are out there that are like, okay, this has got me fired up. Like, I don't want to deal with this either. Like, enough's enough. We've got to make change. If you're a patient out there and you use a pharmacy, especially if you use a small local community pharmacy, what can you do to help in this fight?
So back to if you're a consumer, you have more power than you think you do. Especially if you get into, if you're in a group or part of a, social media group or things like that, your voice can be amplified pretty loudly. So probably the two biggest points of where a difference could be made. One is with your employer. Your employer decides what health benefits you have. And some people are scared of talking to their employer because they're like, hey, I don't want to mess with my job. And we get that. I understand that. But if you're in a position to talk to your employer about your prescription drug coverage and your health insurance coverage, they do that. The prescription drug coverage, one important thing to know, we haven't talked about this, and there are also middlemen for your employers called healthcare brokers. And these brokers are in cahoots with the PBMs. So they always recommend the same PBMs over and over again. So if you can go to your employer, HR, your CFO, CEO, depending on what kind of company you're in, and say, look, there is a better way with prescription drug coverage if you're using one of the big PBMs. But if you listen to your broker, you're going to get the same answer over and over. Consider, going outside of just listening to the same monotonous tones from your broker. Not all brokers are bad, but if they've been recommending the same big three PBMs over and over, there's probably a problem there. The second is using your voice to your elected officials, both state and federal. There's a bill in Congress. It's called the PBM Reform Act. It was just introduced a few weeks ago, and it has something that would help patients, it would help employers, and it would help pharmacists to get a predictable, transparent, and a more simple payment method for some prescriptions. It's not the end all be all, but it's a step in the right direction for patients. So use your voice to talk to your elected officials, tell them PBM reform. And if they happen to remember the bill number, it's House Bill 4317.
That's awesome, because I agree with you. Without advocacy, and that's the power that we all have, and that is to work with our legislators, both state and federal, to make change. And a lot of us sit on the sidelines and expect somebody else to do it, but it's your job to do that. And like you said, it's so important to us as pharmacists that something happens as far as that goes. This will be just a quick one. This will be our tough one for you. We're recording this podcast 5 years from now. What does the ideal reformed pharmacy system look like to you? That's probably an hour question right there. But just quickly, what do you see in 5 years? Are we finally going to get something done?
I strongly believe we will get something done, because the situation is so precarious and bad now that I think consumers, to me, the consumers, the patients are a ticking time bomb that are ready to go off at any time when they've had enough. They've had enough of the lousy system, being forced to use mail order or steered to this pharmacy or overcharge that. So I think consumers and patients are going to have enough. I think taxpayers and the bureaucrats are going to say, I'm tired of getting hosed by my PBM. So I think in 5 years, we see a simpler, more transparent, more predictable model. Something like we cut out the middleman fees, that's 70% that's going to the middleman. And so we have a lower drug price. And for the pharmacies, they're paid the cost to buy the drug plus a dispensing fee that helps them pay for their services, keeping the lights on, all the licenses they have, and all the services they provide. So it's simple for the pharmacist in the pharmacy. The consumer is it's transparent to the consumer, so it's not all these shell games. And hopefully overall, it's a lower price for the consumer as well. And we see PBMs kind of going back to where they started back in the 80s and maybe early 90s, where they were paper shufflers, but they were paper shufflers paid at a reasonable amount and not a profiteering amount. So that's where I think we have to go. I see pharmacists continuing to provide more and more services, and that's an important piece where we'll be able to absorb, some of the shortage of primary care providers in the country. So I'm bullish on the future. It's just the next 4 or 5 years, it's going to be a challenge to get there. And we need consumers, we need patients to raise their voice and say, man, this is ridiculous. Why is it so hard to get a prescription drug? Why do I pay so much? I'm not going to do that anymore.
No, that's true. Doug, this has been great. I really think we shed light on a really hidden topic as far as that goes. And, I look at this. If you're a patient, you got to start asking questions, and, you need to ask your pharmacy, what is the best cash price? Push back when you're told you have to use mail order. Most importantly, talk to your lawmakers, because PBM reform isn't just a pharmacy issue. I mean, it's really a healthcare justice issue that you do have control of. And most importantly, to my pharmacy friends that listen to this podcast, stay loud, stay informed, and stay connected. We've all got to support reform, and many of us have gotten a lot louder. I can tell you, when I go to Washington, I don't have to scream so loud because most people know what a PBM is now. But keep the fight with NCPA and other organizations that are out there, shouting at the mountaintops, this stuff's wrong. And, don't underestimate your power. But with all that, Doug, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, this was fun, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And like I said, thanks for listening to the Trusted Pharmacist podcast. And if this episode helped you see through the fog or how crazy our healthcare system can be at times, please make sure you share it, leave a review. And as always, stay curious, stay empowered, and keep checking out the truth. Thanks so much. Thanks, Doug.